She arrived at the small gathering quietly, the same way she entered most places. She never tried to draw attention to herself. She preferred to stand near the back, listen to conversations, and enjoy the soft buzz of people talking without needing to say much. The event wasn't anything grand, just a simple community get-together held in a friend's home. There were snacks on the table, warm lights hanging along the wall, and a relaxed feeling in the air. People were catching up after months of not seeing each other, and laughter drifted through the room in waves. She smiled politely when someone greeted her, but she stayed on the side, not because she disliked people, but because she felt more comfortable observing rather than being in the center of anything. She had always been like that, gentle, quiet, the kind of person who blended easily into the background. Her calmness was something people liked about her. Even though they never fully understood how deep it ran, in the corner of the room stood an old upright piano. Its wooden body had scratches here and there, and the keys had slightly faded edges from years of use. Some of the guests tapped it lightly as they walked by, as if testing whether it still worked. A few children pressed random notes earlier, laughing at the sound each key made. But now it sat untouched, waiting patiently like a silent guest. She noticed it, of course. She always noticed pianos. No matter where she was, someone's house, a school hall, a cafe, even a hotel lobby, her eyes instinctively found them. There was something comforting about seeing one. Even if she didn't touch it, knowing it was there gave her a strange kind of warmth. But today, she didn't plan to go near it. She didn't play much in public anymore, and not because she lost the ability. She simply didn't like being watched. As the evening went on, she wandered around the room, listening to different conversations. Someone talked about their new job. Another laughed loudly while explaining a recent trip. People were relaxed, happy to take a break from their regular routines. She enjoyed seeing everyone's faces light up as they shared their stories. Even though she wasn't talking much, she felt connected to the moment. At one point, she picked up a small glass of juice from the table and leaned against the wall, taking slow sips. Her mind drifted to the piano again. She tried to ignore the feeling, the soft pull inside her chest that always appeared when she was near one. She looked away, focusing on the people instead. Then someone approached her, smiling warmly. They weren't pushy or loud. They simply tapped her shoulder lightly and asked, "Hey, you know how to play piano, right?" She froze for a moment, surprised. She didn't remember ever telling them that. She wondered how they knew. Maybe someone had mentioned it once long ago. Maybe they had seen her near the piano at a previous event and guessed. She nodded gently, trying not to seem hesitant. "A little," she said, keeping her voice soft. "A little." The person laughed kindly. "Come on, we'd love to hear something. Nothing fancy. Maybe just a basic melody." A basic melody. The words felt safe enough. Simple, easy, nothing that would grab too much attention. She looked around the room. Most people were busy chatting and not paying attention to the piano. It wasn't like they would all stop everything to watch her. She thought about it for a moment. It had been a long time since she played in front of anyone. Years, actually. She played at home often, but that was different. Home was private, quiet, her own space. This room wasn't hers. These people weren't her usual audience. Still, something inside her whispered that maybe it wouldn't hurt to play just a little. So she agreed softly, almost in a whisper. The person smiled and gestured toward the piano. She walked slowly toward it, feeling the faint, nervous flutter she always felt before touching public keys. It wasn't fear exactly, just a kind of awareness, like she was stepping into a light she didn't ask for. She sat on the small wooden bench, adjusting her posture without thinking. Her fingers hovered above the keys, not touching yet. She took a slow breath, the kind one takes before doing something meaningful. Even if that meaning is only personal, the first touch of the keys was gentle. They felt slightly cold at first, but the familiar texture calmed her. She started with a simple pattern, the type of melody people learn early on. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. Just a basic tune everyone could recognize. The kind that sounded peaceful and easy to listen to. A few heads turned, but only briefly. Most people continued chatting. The melody filled the room softly, creating a background sound that blended with the laughter and murmurs. She kept her eyes on the keys, letting the music flow in a steady rhythm. Her fingers moved carefully, not drawing attention, just releasing a calm, delicate sound as she played. Memories drifted through her mind. She remembered a time when playing piano felt like the most natural thing in the world. She remembered practicing for hours, not because anyone told her to, but because she wanted to. She remembered the joy she felt when a melody came out exactly the way she imagined it. Those were good memories, warm ones, untouched by pressure or expectations. Then she remembered the other side, the competitions she was pushed into, the performances where she had to impress people, the moments when music became less about emotion and more about perfection. That was when she began to hide her talent, keeping it close like a secret she didn't want the world to influence. Over time, she played less in public and more for herself. And eventually, even the simplest request to play for others felt like a small challenge. But tonight, something felt different. The room wasn't formal. The people weren't judges. No one expected her to be amazing. They just wanted a simple moment, a simple tune, and she could give them that without feeling drained. As she continued the melody, she noticed her shoulders relaxing. The nervous flutters slowly faded. The simple pattern felt comforting. She realized she was smiling just a little, the kind of smile that forms when someone returns to something they once loved without being rushed. Even though the tune was basic, each note carried a piece of her. She didn't try to add anything fancy. She didn't speed up or shift into anything complex. She stayed with the gentle melody she promised, making it smooth, soft, and full of quiet feeling. And even though it was simple, it had a warmth that made a few more people turn their heads and listen. Someone nearby whispered, "She plays nicely," in a tone of pleasant surprise. She didn't hear the words clearly, but she felt the atmosphere shift just a little. There was a calmness in the room, now less noise, more attention. Not overwhelming, not heavy, just enough to make the moment feel meaningful. She finished the short melody slowly, letting the last notes fade naturally. She kept her hands on the keys for a moment, breathing quietly. When she lifted her fingers, she expected everyone to go back to their conversations. But instead, a few people offered small, warm claps, the kind that said thank you rather than perform more. She smiled shyly, stood up, and stepped away from the piano. She didn't realize she had given the room a moment of peace, something simple, but beautiful. She returned to her place near the wall, unaware that this tiny moment, this small decision to play a basic tune, was the beginning of something much bigger. Tonight, she thought she played a simple melody, but soon, without planning to, she would show a side of herself she had hidden for years, a side that would turn a quiet evening into something unforgettable. She didn't know it yet. No one in the room did. But the magic inside her hadn't disappeared at all. It was simply waiting. She stood near the wall for a while after playing, still feeling the warmth of the moment lingering in her chest. The small applause she received wasn't loud or exaggerated, but it was genuine, and that meant more to her than any long cheer ever could. She sipped her juice again, trying to calm her thoughts. It had been such a long time since she played anything outside her home, and even though the melody was simple, she felt something inside her opening, something she thought had faded long ago, as conversations continued around her. She drifted into her own world for a moment. She didn't do it on purpose. Sometimes memories just found their way back, especially when she was near a piano. And tonight, those memories felt stronger than usual. She remembered being much younger, barely tall enough to reach the piano keys properly. Back then, the piano was the biggest object in her home, standing tall in the living room like a black and white mountain she wanted to climb. Her parents used to find her sitting on the bench, pressing one key at a time with wide eyes, amazed by how different each note sounded. She didn't know anything about music then. She just liked the feeling of sound filling the room. Eventually, they enrolled her in lessons, thinking she might enjoy learning properly. And she did. Her teacher at the time was gentle, patient, and kind. He would sit beside her and guide her hands one finger at a time, showing her how to move with grace instead of force. She remembered how he used to say, "Don't rush. Music is like breathing slow and natural." Those words stayed with her whole life. She practiced every afternoon after school. It wasn't because someone made her. She genuinely wanted to. There was something peaceful about sitting at the piano after a long day. While other kids played outside or watched cartoons, she sat at the bench, letting the quiet sound of notes wrap around her like a blanket. It was her safe place. But things began to change slowly as she grew older. People around her started noticing her talent. Teachers complimented her. Neighbors talked about how well she played. Even relatives she barely saw would ask her to perform whenever she visited. Her parents were proud, and she appreciated that. But somewhere along the way, the gentle joy she used to feel became mixed with expectations. It started with small school performances, just a few people sitting in folding chairs, clapping politely. Then it turned into bigger events, competitions, recitals, and endless hours of practice she didn't always want. She remembered sitting at the piano late at night, playing the same piece again and again until her hands felt stiff. She didn't complain out loud, but inside, she missed the freedom she once had when the piano felt like a friend instead of a task. The pressure became more noticeable. When her new music instructor, years later, treated every mistake like a failure. He wasn't unkind exactly, but he was strict. He demanded perfection from everyone. And while some students loved the challenge, she slowly began to feel more tired. She lost the quiet joy she once had. She felt like music was slipping away from her. She would sit at the piano and feel nervous instead of peaceful. Eventually, she stopped performing altogether. She told her parents she wanted a break, and they didn't argue, sensing how drained she was. She continued playing at home for herself, but even that became something she did less often. She loved music, but she no longer wanted people watching her, waiting for her to impress them. She wanted her music to be private again, something soft and personal. Those years were a mix of peace and sadness. She regained her freedom, but she missed the part of herself that once played fearlessly. Whenever she touched the keys, she felt the same tenderness she felt as a child. But she could also feel the weight of the memories that pushed her away from the stage. Tonight, however, things felt different. When she played that simple melody earlier, she felt something familiar, a softness she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about being perfect. It was just a moment where she allowed herself to play without thinking too much. That small tune awakened something she thought she had lost as she stood quietly in the corner. Someone approached her again. This time, it was an older woman holding a cup of tea. She smiled kindly and said, "You play very beautifully. It's so calming." She felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she replied softly. "It was just something small." "Small. Yes," the woman said with a gentle laugh. "But sometimes the simple things are the most lovely." She nodded politely, appreciating the warmth in the woman's tone. She wasn't used to compliments anymore. She used to get them all the time when she performed.
Ow.
But those compliments had always come with expectations, pressure, or comparisons. But this one felt genuine, a simple acknowledgement, nothing more. The woman walked away, leaving her to her thoughts again. Across the room, a group of guests were discussing something animatedly, and she could hear faint laughter. Someone else was telling a story about their recent trip to the countryside. A child ran past her with a piece of cake, giggling. The room was lively, yet she felt strangely peaceful. Her gaze drifted back to the piano. The bench was still slightly tilted from where she had moved it. The keys were still touched by the soft glow of the lights. She wondered how long it had been since she sat in front of a piano and actually enjoyed the moment. Tonight might have been the first time in years. She walked a little closer, not enough to draw attention, just enough to stand near it. She placed her hand lightly on the wooden frame. Her fingers traced a scratch near the corner, and she wondered how many people had sat there through the years. There was something comforting about an old, slightly worn piano. It made her feel like it held stories of its own. She didn't realize someone was watching her, till a voice spoke beside her. "You miss it, don't you?" She turned slightly to see a middle-aged man standing nearby. He didn't look curious or nosy. His expression was simply observant, like someone who understood more than he said. She hesitated before answering. "Maybe," she said quietly. "The way you played," he continued, "it didn't feel like someone who just knows music. It felt like someone who lived with it for a long time." She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands, the same hands that once played confidently on big stages. She sighed softly. "I used to play a lot," she admitted. "Before. A long time ago." He nodded slowly, as if that explained everything. "You stopped?" "For a while," she replied. "I just needed space." "Sometimes space helps," he said, leaning lightly against the wall. "Sometimes it shows us what we truly miss." She didn't know why, but his words made her pause. There was no pressure in his tone, no suggestion that she needed to perform again. It was simply a reflection, something she could take or ignore. He walked away a few seconds later. Leaving her alone with her thoughts, she touched the piano keys once more, pressing a single note. It rang softly, blending with the room's quiet chatter. She felt a small spark inside her chest. Not exactly excitement, not exactly longing, but something warm. As she stood there, a memory resurfaced. She could almost see her younger self sitting at her old piano, swinging her feet because they didn't reach the floor yet. Her small fingers pressing the keys with joy, unaware of anything else in the world. She missed that version of herself, the girl who played without fear, without expectations, without pressure. A young child suddenly approached her, looking up with curious eyes. "Can you play again?" the child asked, holding a tiny cup of juice. She smiled gently. "Maybe later." The child nodded and ran off. She watched them join a small group of kids playing near the window, their laughter echoing. She wondered if anyone else in the room noticed how different she felt now. She didn't look different. She stood the same way, smiled the same soft smile, kept her hands folded gently in front of her. But inside something had shifted. The simple tune she played earlier had awakened a quiet desire, a small reminder that music was still a part of her story. More people walked past her. Someone complimented the snacks. Someone else talked about the weather. The evening moved naturally, but she felt like she was moving through two worlds, one in the present, filled with warm lights and easy conversations, and one in the past, filled with melodies, memories, joy, and pressure. She thought about the moment she stopped performing years ago. She remembered packing away her sheet music, stacking the books neatly on a shelf she rarely touched afterwards. She remembered staring at her piano for days, unsure if she wanted to keep playing at all. But she could never stop completely. Even when she didn't perform publicly, she couldn't abandon the piano. It was woven into her heart. Tonight reminded her of that truth. Slowly, she walked away from the piano and stood near the entrance, watching the room. She wanted to stay a little longer, not because she felt obligated, but because she felt a quiet connection forming between her and this space. She had arrived quietly, planning to leave without being noticed, yet here she was, feeling something stir inside her again. She took a slow breath, letting it settle. Something told her the night wasn't over yet. Something told her that the simple tune she played earlier was only the beginning. There was more inside her waiting to come out. More emotion than she had allowed herself to release in years. She didn't realize it yet. But soon, she would sit at that same piano again, not because someone asked, but because her heart would guide her there. And the next time she touched those keys, the room would witness a side of her no one had seen before. Tonight had woken something inside her, and that quiet spark inside her chest was growing. Even she didn't know just how powerful it would become. She stayed near the entrance for a while, letting the soft hum of the room settle around her. People were still laughing, chatting, and enjoying their evening, but her thoughts were drifting somewhere far deeper. Something inside her felt awake in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was gentle, like a quiet whisper, reminding her of a part of herself she had locked away. She tried to ignore it at first. She told herself she had already played once. That was enough. She didn't want attention. She didn't want people watching her too closely. She had spent years avoiding situations that reminded her of her old performances, of the pressure that once surrounded her. But even as she tried to calm her thoughts, she kept hearing the faint echo of the notes she had played earlier. She walked over to the refreshment table, pretending to look at the snacks, but her eyes kept drifting back toward the piano. It was strange how something so simple could pull her like that. Earlier, she had convinced herself it was just a one-time moment, a small favor, nothing more. But now, her fingers tingled as if they remembered something her mind had forgotten. A couple walked by, laughing lightly as they talked about a funny story. A group of friends stood near the window, sharing pictures on their phones. Everything looked normal, easy, carefree. She wished she could blend back into that easy flow. But her mind slid into memories she hadn't visited in years. She remembered one particular evening from her childhood. She was maybe 10 or 11, sitting at her living room piano with the sun setting outside. She had been practicing the same basic tune over and over, not because she had to, but because she loved how it made her feel. She remembered humming along with it, feeling like the music and her voice were pieces of the same puzzle. She remembered her parents watching quietly from the hallway, smiling proudly. Back then, the world felt soft, but the memories shifted, as they often did, to the years when music became something she had to prove. She saw herself as a teenager, sitting stiffly at a competition stage, waiting for her turn with sweaty palms and a pounding heart. She remembered the sound of other contestants playing complicated pieces at impossible speeds. She remembered the heavy silence before the judges announced the winners, and the endless discussions about technique, precision, and improvement. Even when she won, she didn't always feel happy. The joy was replaced by relief that she didn't disappoint anyone. She sighed quietly, returning to the present. Those memories didn't hurt anymore, but they still reminded her why she had walked away. Tonight wasn't supposed to bring all of that back. It was supposed to be a simple evening, nothing more. Yet something deep inside her was shifting, the quiet voice telling her that maybe her relationship with music didn't need to stay. It's the same forever. She took another sip of her drink and leaned against the wall. Then she heard someone say softly, "You know, I think everyone wants to hear you play again." She turned her head to see a woman standing beside her, giving her an encouraging smile. She wasn't pushy or demanding. Her smile was gentle, almost understanding. "Oh," she said quietly. "I'm not sure. You don't have to if you don't want to," the woman said kindly. "But when you were playing earlier, people really felt something. It was peaceful." She lowered her eyes. "I was only playing something small. Sometimes small things make a big difference," the woman replied. Then she walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts again. She looked at the piano once more. It sat there silently, as if waiting patiently for her to decide. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do. She wasn't sure if she should play again at all. But her heart felt warm, and the warmth was spreading slowly like a soft glow filling her chest. A few minutes passed. The room calmed just a little, the conversation softening into gentle background noise. She let her fingers brush against her own hand, feeling the faint leftover energy from earlier. She thought about how she used to improvise when she was younger, how she created melodies without planning anything, letting her emotions guide her fingers naturally. It was something she hadn't done in a very long time, but the thought of it made her heart ache in a sweet, longing way. Before she even realized what she was doing, her feet slowly carried her back toward the piano. She didn't walk confidently. She moved quietly, almost cautiously, as if she were approaching an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. A few people noticed her walking and nudged each other gently, but no one said anything. They simply watched her with quiet curiosity. She sat down at the bench again, her breath catching slightly as she adjusted her posture. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling just a little. She wasn't nervous because of the people. She was nervous because she didn't know what would come out if she let herself play freely again. It had been too long. She wasn't sure she remembered how to express herself that way anymore. She pressed the first note lightly. It rang softly, steady and warm. She pressed another, then another, building a small pattern. She didn't start with a melody she knew. She started with something new, something simple, something that came directly from the feeling in her chest. Her fingers moved slowly, exploring the keys like someone rediscovering a forgotten path. The notes blended together, gentle and thoughtful. The room grew quieter, People looked up from their conversations, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, but she didn't notice any of that. She was looking only at the keys, letting the sound guide her. Her heart beat softly. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the notes. Her fingers moved more gracefully with each passing second, as if the piano itself was reminding her who she once was. Without planning it, she drifted into improvisation. The simple notes grew into a more expressive pattern. The melody deepened, becoming fuller, richer. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was emotional, pure emotion translated into sound. Every note felt like a quiet confession, something she had held inside for years without speaking. Her hands moved more confidently now, gliding across the keys with a freedom she hadn't felt since she was a child. She didn't think about technique. She didn't think about pleasing anyone. She didn't think about being perfect. She simply let herself feel. The room became still. Even the faint hum of conversation had faded away. It wasn't because the music was loud. It was because it carried something people couldn't ignore, something soft, real, and deeply human. No one said a word. People exchanged glances filled with surprise, admiration, and quiet wonder. They hadn't expected this from her. Earlier, she played a simple tune, something easy and peaceful. But this was different. This was her heart speaking through her fingers. She didn't notice their reactions. She was lost in the music, her mind drifting effortlessly between memories and emotions. She felt the joy she once knew, the sadness she had carried, the relief of letting go, and the hope that something beautiful could come from all of it. Her hands moved faster now, then slowed down, then rose again in gentle waves. The melody shifted like a story, soft in some places, bright in others, warm throughout. She could feel her chest tightening with emotion. She could feel a small smile forming without meaning to. She could feel tears pressing at the corners of her eyes, though none fell. She didn't know how long she played. Moments like this didn't follow time. They simply lived on their own, deep and free. Finally, after what felt like both a long time and no time at all, she let the melody soften. She slowed her hands gently, letting the notes fade naturally into silence. The last note lingered, hanging in the air like a soft sigh. When she lifted her hands from the keys, the room remained silent for a moment, completely still. Then slowly, applause began. Not loud, not wild, but full of warmth. The kind of applause that came from people who felt something genuine. She stared at her hands, surprised by what she had just done. Her heart was beating fast, but not with fear. It was beating with something else, something she had missed for too long. She stood from the bench softly, unable to hide the shimmer of emotion on her face. People smiled at her, not with expectation, but with appreciation. They didn't look at her like a performer. They looked at her like someone who had shared a piece of herself. She stepped away from the piano slowly, feeling lighter than she had in years. Her legs trembled slightly, and she held her arm with her other hand to steady herself. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't need to. The music had spoken for her. As she moved across the room, a few people approached her quietly, offering soft compliments. Their voices weren't loud or overwhelming. They spoke gently, like they didn't want to break the magic that still lingered in the air. She nodded shyly, thanking them with a small smile. She wasn't used to praise anymore, but this felt different. It didn't feel like pressure. It felt like connection. The evening continued, but now the atmosphere felt changed. People were still talking and laughing, but something softer hung in the air, something peaceful, something beautiful, and she felt it deep in her chest. This was the beginning of something new, or maybe something old, returning in a gentler form. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive again. The days after her breathtaking performance moved slowly, yet each moment carried a quiet kind of excitement. People around her town talked about the night in soft tones, as though speaking too loudly might break the delicate magic she had created. But she didn't feel like a star or a hero. She felt like someone standing on the edge of something new and a little frightening. She knew her life was changing. She didn't fully understand how much. The invitations started coming in one after another. Some were from local community groups, others from small music clubs, and a few from places she had only heard about when older musicians talked with admiration. She didn't say yes to everything. In fact, she didn't say yes to any of them right away. She took her time, thinking about what each invitation meant and what she truly wanted. She wasn't afraid of performing. That part had become natural. What worried her more was losing herself. She had seen it happen before. People who were once kind and grounded would get a small taste of attention. Yet suddenly they behaved like someone entirely different. She didn't want to become unrecognizable. She wanted to stay the same person who loved simple melodies, soft mornings, and the gentle feel of piano keys under her fingers. Still, there was one invitation she couldn't ignore. It came from a well-known center in the next city, a place where gifted young musicians trained before going on to larger stages. The letter was written with a tone of respect, not demand. It said they had heard about her performance and wanted to see if she would consider joining their program. They believed her talent was rare and wanted to guide her further. She read that letter again and again. It made her heart beat faster. This wasn't just another small event. This was a chance to grow. But accepting meant leaving home for long hours every day, meeting people she didn't know, and walking into rooms where others might judge her before she even played a note. She thought about the old piano bench where her journey had started. She thought about the quiet evenings spent practicing when no one was watching. And then she thought about how it felt to transform a simple melody into something powerful and unforgettable. That feeling, the one that rose inside her like a warm breath, was too real to ignore, so she accepted. She didn't tell many people at first. Only her family and a few close friends knew. They were happy for her, though some were worried the world might be too demanding. She understood their fears, but she also knew she couldn't hold herself back because of what might go wrong. Her first day at the music center felt like stepping into a new world. The building was large and filled with echoes of sound. Someone was practicing violin down the hall. Another room held a singer warming up, pianos, drums, flutes, and voices blended together in a strange mixture that somehow felt welcoming. The instructor she met that day was calm and observant. He asked her simple questions: why she played, what she loved about the piano, what moments moved her the most. She answered honestly, even when the words felt vulnerable. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. He simply listened. And that made her relax a little. Then he asked her to play. She sat at the polished piano, feeling unsure for the first few seconds. This was different from performing at an event or on a stage. Here, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was showing a part of herself. She chose a melody she had loved since childhood, one she had played often but never shared publicly. At first her hands felt stiff, but the more she let the familiar notes guide her, the more her body relaxed. She closed her eyes, not because she wanted to look dramatic, but because it helped her listen better. The room faded. All that remained was the sound and the steady beat of her heart. When she lifted her hands at the end, she worried the instructor might say she lacked technique or structure, or some other thing she had never formally learned. Instead, he smiled. He said her playing carried something that couldn't be taught, something that came from inside. He said technique could be shaped over time, but the feeling she played with was rare. Hearing that felt like a soft wave washing over her. She didn't realize how tightly she had been holding her breath until that moment. Training began soon after. Her days became longer and more structured. She woke early, practiced, attended lessons, took breaks, then practiced more. Some days felt smooth, like her fingers danced easily across each key. Other days were frustrating. She would stumble on a difficult part and feel annoyed at herself. But no matter how tough the day was, she showed up again the next morning. She also met other musicians, some around her age, some younger and some older. They each had their own style, their own dreams, their own reasons for being there. A few of them treated her kindly, welcoming her with open smiles. Others kept their distance, curious but cautious, and some looked at her with a mix of admiration and competition, as though trying to figure out if she was a friend or a challenge. Even so, she tried to stay humble and kind. She listened when others played, learned from their techniques, and shared little pieces of advice when someone asked for help. Slowly, she became part of the community. Still, something inside her remained different. She played with a kind of emotion that felt deeply personal. When she touched the keys, she wasn't just producing sound. She was telling a story, one note at a time. One afternoon, the instructor approached her with a gentle seriousness. He told her there would be a small performance at the center in a few weeks. Each student had to play a piece of their choice. It wasn't a competition, but it was a chance to show their progress. She agreed. But as soon as he left, she felt her nerves tighten. She wasn't afraid of performing, but this was different. Here, she would be standing among people who practiced just as much as she did. People who understood the tiny details behind every sound. Days passed, and she practiced a piece she had been shaping for months. It wasn't complex in the traditional sense. It didn't show off fast hands or dramatic style, but it carried her heart. Every part of it reflected something she had felt: hope, worry, joy, confusion, and the small moments that gave her strength. The night of the performance arrived quickly. She stood backstage, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and fear building inside her. She heard other students perform before hers, sharp rhythms, powerful strings. They were all talented. When her name was called, the room grew still. She walked toward the piano, sat down, and let her hands settle over the keys. This time, she didn't try to be perfect. She didn't try to impress. She simply played. Her fingers moved with a softness that slowly grew into strength. The melody rose gently, then soared. The room, filled with people who understood music deeply, fell quiet in a way she had never experienced before. It was as though every listener leaned in, not wanting to miss a single sound. When she reached the final note, she let it linger before lifting her hands. Silence washed through the room. Then came the applause, slow at first, then louder, fuller, rising like a wave that wrapped around her. She felt a warmth spread in her chest. Not pride, not ego. Something simpler, a quiet understanding that she was meant to follow this path. It wasn't because others praised her. It wasn't because she wanted recognition. It was because playing the piano allowed her to share a part of herself with the world. Not through words, but through sound. And she knew her journey was far from over. More challenges would come, more moments of doubt, more days when her hands wouldn't listen. But she also knew that when her fingers touched the keys, something inside her always came alive. She walked off the stage with steady steps, knowing she hadn't just played a piece. She had shared her truth, and somewhere deep inside, she sensed that an even greater moment was waiting for her, one that would test her, shape her, and reveal just how powerful her music could truly be. The weeks after the performance at the music center felt different from everything she had known before. Something inside her had shifted, although she could not fully explain it. The applause she heard that night still echoed softly in her mind. But it was not the applause itself that stayed with her, it was the stillness before it. The moment when every person in the room seemed to breathe with her melody. That quiet connection meant more than any praise. Life at the center moved forward. Classes continued, lessons grew harder, and the pressure increased little by little. Some days, she handled it easily. Other days, she felt worn out, like her fingers were moving through heavy air instead of across the smooth keys. But she never let herself drift away from the reason she came, here to grow without losing herself. One afternoon, her instructor asked to meet with her. His tone was calm, but she sensed something serious behind his words. She followed him into a small room with soft lighting and a single upright piano against the wall. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at her with a thoughtful expression. He told her there would soon be a major event in the city, an annual gathering of musicians, teachers and performers from different regions. It was known for featuring young talent, and many musicians who performed there went on to bigger opportunities. He explained that someone from the organizing team had visited the center, heard her practice from down the hallway, and asked about her. They wanted her to perform. She blinked, uncertain whether she heard him correctly. This wasn't a small school performance or a quiet local gathering. This was something far bigger. something that could place her in front of people who shaped careers. The instructor didn't pressure her. He simply explained what the event was, what it meant, and how important it could be for her future. Then he asked her to take time to think about it. She nodded, but her mind was already spinning. The idea felt unreal. A part of her was excited, even hopeful, but another part felt frightened. What if she wasn't ready? What if she froze? What if the audience expected something extraordinary and she couldn't deliver? That night, she didn't sleep much. She lay awake listening to the soft hum of the night outside her window. She thought about the first time she ever played a piano. She thought about the simple melody she transformed into something magical without meaning to. She thought about the people who had doubted her, the kindly ones who had supported her, and the quiet determination that had brought her this far. She realized something important. Fear would always follow her if she allowed it to. But music had never been about fear for her. It had always been about expression, feeling, and connection. And she knew deep down that turning away from this opportunity would leave her with a regret she couldn't ignore. So the next morning, she found her instructor and told him she would do it. The preparation began immediately. This time, she did not want to play something familiar. She wanted to create something new, something honest, something that reflected everything she had lived through so far. She started with a gentle line of notes, simple but filled with longing. Then she built around it, shaping the melody like a story. Each part carried a piece of her journey, her earliest doubts, her quiet dreams, the criticism she faced, the unexpected applause, and the courage she discovered within herself. Some days the piece flowed out easily. Other days she struggled so much that she felt like tearing the pages of her notebook. But she never stopped. She practiced until late in the evening, long after most of the other students had gone home. Sometimes the instructor listened, offering soft suggestions. Sometimes other students paused outside the practice room, drawn by the sound, but she didn't try to impress them. She focused only on shaping the melody into something that felt right. As the day of the event approached, she found herself growing quieter. She didn't talk much, didn't share what she was feeling. There was a tightness in her chest that never fully left. Yet whenever she sat at the piano, the tightness loosened. The music reminded her she was not alone. The melody she created seemed to tell her story back to her, and that gave her strength. Finally, the event day arrived. The city hall where it was being held was large and beautifully designed, with a stage that seemed to stretch out under warm lights. Musicians from different places filled the backstage area. Some looked relaxed, others nervous, and some whispered to themselves as if reciting silent encouragement. She stood among them. Feeling small but determined, her turn was scheduled near the end of the evening. This meant she had to wait through many performances. As she stood behind the curtains, she listened to the other musicians. There were powerful violin pieces, bold piano performances, soulful singers, and skilled instrument ensembles. Each one brought something different to the stage. Instead of feeling threatened, she felt moved. She understood that every performer carried their own story, their own fears and hopes. Realizing that made her feel less alone. When her name was finally called, she stepped forward with steady, quiet steps. The stage lights were brighter than she expected. She sat down at the grand piano and took a slow breath. The audience watched, waiting. A soft hush settled over the room. She placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes rose gently like a whisper. They were soft enough that the room leaned in. Her hands moved naturally, almost as though guided by something deeper. The melody flowed like a river, steady, emotional, and warm. Every sound told a part of her story. The quiet beginnings, the sudden rises, the moments of doubt. The parts where the music felt like it might break, but then lifted, again stronger than before. As she reached the middle of the piece, the melody grew fuller. Her hands glided across the piano with confidence she never knew she had. Everything around her disappeared. She did not see the audience, the stage, or the lights. She only felt the music. The final sequence was soft again, almost like a return to the very beginning, but touched with the strength she had gained. When she pressed the last note, she let it linger, fading slowly into silence. For a moment, the room did not move. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud at first. It was slow, thoughtful, rising naturally, but it soon grew into a strong, full wave of claps that filled the entire hall. She lifted her eyes and saw people standing. Not everyone, but enough to make her wonder if she was dreaming. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with emotion she had no words for. She stood, bowed softly, and walked off the stage. As she stepped backstage, she felt warmth on her face and realized she had tears in her eyes. Her instructor met her with a proud smile. He didn't say much, and he didn't have to. His eyes showed everything he felt. Later that night, after the event ended and people left the hall, she walked outside into the cool night air. The sky was dark but calm, the city lights glowing softly. She stood there quietly, letting the moment settle inside her. She knew her journey was still only beginning. There would be harder days ahead, more challenges, more pressure, but she also knew something far more important. She was ready, because she had discovered that her music wasn't about fame or praise. It wasn't about proving something to anyone. It was about expressing. Truth, it was about touching. Hearts, it was about finding her place in the world. Through sound, as she walked down the quiet street toward home, she felt something indescribably calm kind of joy. The feeling of knowing she was aligned with the path meant for her, and she understood, perhaps for the first time in her life, that the melody inside her would never stop growing. It would change, deepen, rise, fall, and rise again. But it would always be hers, and as long as she had her music, she would never be lost.